So I sit here actually at the Hatchery, which is a food incubator in Chicago, where every day I help entrepreneurs commercialize their dreams. So helping with recipe development and scale up and manufacturing Q&A or troubleshooting, a lot of that which we will touch on today. Sorry, trying to get the slides to shift.
I still see, yeah, there you go. All right.
So I promise there's only two slides on who Ingredion is, but just in case folks on the call aren't aware, Ingredion is a leading global plant-based ingredient supplier. So we have 18,000 customers in 120 countries. 70% of all new global food products that are launched each year contain an ingredient that Ingredion produces. So if you've eaten something, we've probably made something that's included in it. We have 500 food scientists globally. Our headquarters are outside of Chicago.
We got the freeze.
Freeze, oh, yeah.
Amanda, you froze for a second. Okay, but I see you again, Amanda. Keep going.
Yeah.
Amanda, oh, that's a little scratchy.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I can, Amanda,
you're up, Connor.
Okay, sorry. You're a little scratchy there.
It's okay. You may need to take over for me, but we'll try
again. If you break out again, I can.
Amanda, now that it's working, just a quick question for you. So, like, you guys are in 70% of every product basically that gets made. What are the top couple ones?
That's a great question. That brings us to the next slide. So the top things that we're in are going to be starches. So think cornstarch, tapioca starch, as well as the flour versions of that. So tapioca flour and rice flour. The next is going to be hydrocolloids. So xanthan gum, guar gum, things like that. And then finally our sugar and sugar reduction products. So corn syrup, stevia, things like that. So this is kind of our portfolio from texturizing solutions all the way to sugar reduction, proteins, and fibers. That's kind of how we break up our portfolio.
Perfect.
Okay, so we like to talk about innovation from insight to solution. So our presentation today is broken out into inspiring customers, which includes consumer and market insights, ideation and concept development, and rapid prototyping. Then you'd move into the feasibility and development stage, which is, developing that formula and trying to scale it up, which was always the trickiest part. And then finally getting to full production scale up, formula optimization, and launching your solution to the market. So today we'll walk you through the product development cycle focused in these three main categories. Okay.
Can you also just explain to everyone, like, who do you guys typically work with? Because it's like, if you're a very early brand, not everybody will work with you at that stage. So like, who are the people, and like, you guys do that kind of full suite of actual development for people. Like, who are the kind of people you work with, and what happens with the small brands?
Yeah, for sure. So Ingredion works with both emerging brands and large global CPG companies. We actually have a dedicated team that Erin Hill, who just joined us, is a member of, that works exclusively with emerging customers. We have our online chat function where you can chat with a solutions guru now. So this is anyone can chat, just like a AOL Instant Messenger back in the day. You can chat with a food scientist at any time who's going to help you with any questions you may have. So we really do try and focus on, what's something that an emerging brand can utilize, which is going to be our chat function, right? Versus perhaps a large CPG company may get a visit from Ingredion, right? So we have different avenues of how we can support customers based off of their service model. And then Connor also works at the Hatchery, which is designed specifically for emerging brands in the Chicago area as well. So we really do try and divide and conquer our resources to work with both small customers and large.
Cool. And just in case anyone wants to reach out to them throughout, I'll just drop their contact info in the chat here too.
Yeah. Okay. So first we'll talk about inspiration. So we broke out some of the slides into common pitfalls. So something that we often see with emerging brands is that they try to do everything at once. They want to have lots of flavors and lots of sugar-reduced options and get into all different kinds of markets without growing the popularity on their original product first. So a good way to help with this common pitfall is using consumer insights and market research, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So we've thought a glossary of insight tools would be helpful because these are often thrown around and what do they all mean, right? So consumer research is the process of investigating the needs, preferences, behaviors, and opinions of consumers. So this is really focused on the everyday person who's going to eat your product, and this is the overarching research model for that. Next, we've got sensory research, which is usually done by a trained panel. So Ingredion actually has their own sensory panel that come in 2 or 3 days a week. They've been trained to determine the different flavor profiles of cooked milk versus raw milk versus 2% milk versus whole milk. And they're really designed to focus in on specific perceptions of flavors after they've been fully trained. Consumer insights, this is going to be in a business-to-business setting, focused mostly on voice of consumer, retailers, and a customer satisfaction survey. So really wanting to figure out, for us, right, our customers are you guys, but for you, your customers are going to be the end consumer. So we try and separate that out by voice of customer versus how satisfied our customers are. For market analysis, this is going to be a comprehensive study of a specific market. So think like the cookie market or the cake market. Bakery and snacks would be a great example of a market analysis, looking at the size, specific brands, and trends. And that leads us to trends research, which is what everyone wants to do, which is predict the future, right? We'd all love a little looking glass into what's going to be the next big thing. But we're trying to look at consumer trends, ingredient trends, culture and demographic shifts, and figure out what's going to be popular based off of looking at what we think is going to happen in the future. Next slide. So where do we see this typically falling in? So here's just some examples of our market research and consumer interest studies, just to show you some examples of data that's out there. So for us, we're looking at flavor, texture, and healthful and trying to find that sweet spot of where consumers are grading overall liking. So texture adds interest and impacts consumer choices. So for us as a customer, we're looking at what are textures that people are looking for and what are things that influence texture. So 76% of people believe texture is more important than flavor, which I think this is really interesting and can help drive the decisions that you make, right, as you launch new food and beverage products.
What's an example of a like texture in a product that you think would be really important?
Crunchy versus crispy, right? Some people may think they're the same, but they're actually not, right? Or smooth, right? Those would be another. Smooth and creamy are not the same either. So a lot of these textures can be broken out with trained sensory panels to be very, very specific. But those are different kinds of things. Maybe something that you can answer in the chat. Do you prefer a chewy cookie or a crunchy cookie, right? That's another texture, and you often see cookies with both, right? Brands will launch both chewy and crunchy, right? Or crispy.
Chewy all the way. But I used to work for Mars M&Ms, and when they came out with the crispy M&M, it was incredible. Like forget everything else. Let's only go crispy.
And that's because it's a food with a multi-texture. Thank you. So that's something that has a crunchy shell, the chocolate that's smooth, and then also the crispy on the inside. And then also we think that eating experience, so 79% of folks believe that texture determines overall satisfaction. So next slide. And if people aren't happy with texture, then they don't come back. So a product food that I don't like because of its texture is an avocado. It's soft and mushy, and I don't want it to be soft and mushy. So that's something, if everyone also can think of a food product that you don't like purely because of its texture, for me, it's avocados. So these are just examples of insight data that this comes specifically from our proprietary global studies that we have, but there's information like this out there, and it behooves you to use it, right? You may think that you need to come up with multiple flavors, for example, when you launch a product, but perhaps texture is something also to consider. So we'd recommend that emerging brands find this data that's out there and use it to help drive some of your decision-making choices. So the next piece that I have is rapid prototyping. So once you've used the data to help come up with a concept or an idea, right? You want to create X, Y, and Z because you found data that shows there's a gap in the market for that. Then we would recommend doing rapid prototyping. And this often happens in your kitchen. So you don't need any crazy equipment. However, most large CPG companies use what's called a Thermomix. So a Thermomix is going to be able to heat and mix at the same time automatically. It doesn't require you to stir or get burns on the bottom. It has a lot of different capabilities. So shout out to Thermomix, but this is something that lots of companies utilize. Ingredion has dozens of them in our labs and is a great tool to help you make prototypes more rapidly and much better mimic full-scale production compared to just using standard kitchen utensils. So this would be a good thing if you're making a sauce or a soup or a dressing, even some kinds of heated beverages, perhaps. We would definitely recommend using a Thermomix to help speed up your prototyping and better mimic full-scale production. Okay, and I'm going to pass it off to Connor, who will talk about feasibility and development.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. So I'm excited here to go over a little bit more in the product development cycle. There's a lot of slides here. I want to just touch briefly on a lot of them, and I want to include a lot of them for reference because I think they're important for a lot of you as you move on to your product development journey. But we're going to start with talking a little bit about food scientists. When you get into product development, I cannot advise you enough to use a food scientist however you can. A food scientist is going to differ from somebody that's developing a recipe, or if you don't have a food science background, they're going to understand how to make a food safe, how to make a food manufacturable, and how to make a food able to sit on the shelf for as long as you desire and have a good eating quality. They'll have knowledge of food safety and regulations, food engineering and scale up, and product development. They oftentimes specialize in one of those three areas. For instance, I do a lot more in product development and scale up than I do in safety and regulation, but I understand enough about safety and regulation to advise or to at least develop a process that I know is safe and legal. So food scientists are critical for safe formulation, development, and scale up. And there's a lot of ways you can access a food scientist. Obviously, you can hire a food scientist. That's probably got the biggest barrier to entry, but you could also partner with a consultant to get some food science work done. I think a really good one is the next two, which is partnering with a co-packer who offers R&D support. And I'm going to probably hammer on this a few times. When you're looking at co-manufacturing as an entrepreneur, the ones that can give you R&D support and the ones that can give you scale up support are really worth their weight in gold. It's hard information to find, and a lot can go wrong during that process. So having a co-man with R&D support is really important.
Well, also remembering that then you may be tied to them,
yes,
and what they know about you. So good to consider both, like maybe if you really need them, but also sometimes you have a little more control if you bring your formula with you.
Definitely. That's a great point. Yes. I like to go at the point of they understand their process a lot, or their equipment and their capabilities and how to get your product, the best product through that really well. So if you have an idea and a recipe that you own, working with them on the process can be really helpful. But then also ingredient suppliers offer a lot of R&D support too, like ourselves. We are here to help with our own ingredients as well as how they work in process and help you fine tune your recipe and product.
And maybe if I could just add on to that from a brand perspective,
Sure.
I was really lucky when I was launching a brand that, the board, like the founders of the company, the owner, they're kind of a big deal. And so we could approach a really major flavor house and they were willing to actually do the formula for us for free using incredibly advanced ingredients that they have and modulators, and the flavors really top notch, and made what I thought was the highest quality product on the market. as a very early brand, just by myself, nobody would have done that for me, but because of the credibility of the company, they did it. But then, you're also stuck buying flavors from them forever at what would be a higher rate because they're proprietary. If I hadn't had that, I would have gone a food scientist route. And I think you can ask often in our Slack if people have one to recommend. And then I know, with Ingredion, they have some cool options, including the Catalyst program that I know Amanda will talk about at the end. And if anyone else has done it a different way, maybe throw it in the chat here so everyone can see. All right, back to you, Connor.
So some more pitfalls. We're going to start with shelf life before we really get into anything, because it defines a lot of the decisions that you will make in your product development cycle. So compromises oftentimes need to be made between texture, flavor, storage conditions, and I'll even include formulation cost here, right? When you're looking to extend shelf life. You may have to be open to using new ingredients and maybe processes especially that may solve your problems. And you oftentimes see that customers might have unrealistic shelf life expectations or requirements if you're not familiar with food safety requirements. And have not run a certified shelf life study with a third party. I think a good example here, right? There's a reason why you go to a bakery for fresh baked cookies versus getting a package of cookies off the shelf at a grocery store. They're two different eating experiences, and that is largely defined because of the shelf life parameters needed in a retail setting. That's not to say you can't get closer to the bakery given what's out there right now, but it's a good example to draw there. So what is shelf life? It's when I get into shelf life, it's the length of time for which an item remains usable, fit for consumption, and I really like this word, saleable. It's how long does this product meet your expectations as the owner of this company or as the product developer of this company. And that can fall into two categories. Whenever we talk about shelf life, we always talk about food quality and food safety, right? The food has to be safe to eat. But it also needs to be of the quality you expect, right? We can make a product that is safe to eat, but it might taste horrible because it was cooked for 2 days straight to get to the right temperature, but it has no flavor left in it, right? Or we can make a product that's very good on day 1, but it's not safe to eat on day 7. So defined by the product class, and that's oftentimes 3 big ones here: refrigerated, ambient, or frozen. And you can see some general guidelines on how long an expected shelf life is there. And when you're trying to figure out what your shelf life, I get this question all the time, like, what is my shelf life? There are a lot of things we can do to change what your shelf life is, but you need to figure out what your goal shelf life is. And I think the biggest thing to do there is go into like retail requirements. So like, where are you trying to sell and what are the requirements from the retailer there? Like, are you trying to get into Whole Foods? Well, how long do they need your product to last in the refrigerator? Like, what's their minimum for refrigerated shelf life or a shelf stable product? Understand that and then use that as a benchmark for what you're going to develop your product to, because that shelf life is really going to affect how you're going to go through your development cycle and what processes and ingredients you can use.
Connor, somebody asked, like, can you launch a product before the shelf life study is finished, right? Like, typically, how do you figure out what the shelf life is, right? Is it always like a process authority always tells you, or?
Yeah, so you definitely want to go into the process authority to make sure you have a good process. But you can launch with if you don't know what your shelf life is, as long as you know that your food's safe. And I think that's the most important thing. And for ambient and frozen foods, it's pretty obvious to know if your food is safe. With frozen, it's frozen. If it's safe going into the package, it's going to be safe coming out of the freezer. With ambient, as long as you hit your processing and manufacturing, it's going to be safe. Refrigerated can get a little dicier there, but they have a pretty short shelf life, and you should understand that before you go into the refrigerated space. So generally, yes, it's okay, but just know that you may have to pull some product if it doesn't meet your quality expectations.
And I'll add from a brand perspective, we made our product. We had a process authority, which you can like Google there. I mean, how to find one of them, where your co-man can give you one and they'll check your process and tell you, yes, your food will be safe for this long. I wanted it to be safe for as long as possible because the distributors actually are the ones that we saw, like they have requirements that you can only sell in when it has, 75% shelf life, stuff like that. So, we were really trying to do that. But yeah, safety and like flavor and experience are very different, right? Because I mean, man, I like when I've had products that came off the line, I'm like, this is the best thing that anyone ever made. This is the tastiest thing. It's nuts. And then you try it 3 months later, you're like, this is pretty good. And then 3 months later, you're like, I would not drink that, like whatever. And that, by the way, the same is true with like M&Ms. I've had those right off the line at Mars, and you're like, this is the highest quality chocolate in the world. And then you have it like, off the back of a CVS shelf somewhere, and you're like, that's not that good. So big difference.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, day 1 versus day 30 is always
even when
difference.
It's safe. Yeah. Even like so different. I never thought about that. Even with products like Coca-Cola, you're just like, no, they're all the same. Like, actually, no, you pick one of those up that's been sitting for a year and a half or something, a really different experience.
Definitely. So some general strategies to increase shelf life. We're going to talk about a lot of this, but good manufacturing practices, temperature in production, changing your temperatures that you're hitting or how you're storing your product, removing oxygen, and then modulating the pH and the water activity, which we're going to get into right now. So pH, I'm not going to go really big into this, but it's generally how acidic is a food, and food generally ranges from around 3 to 6. That's where you're going to find most food located. The lower the number, the more acidic. The higher the number, the more basic. The lower the number, so the more acidic the food, generally the safer the food is. A few definitions here that you'll see a lot. Acid foods are naturally, they naturally have a pH of 4.6 or below. So that's like maybe like a citrus fruit. Acidified foods are foods in which they are not naturally below 4.6, but you add acid to them to get them below 4.6. And then low acid foods, that's a food in which the pH is above 4.6 and it has a high amount of liquid or water in it. And those generally are the hardest to manufacture. They require the most specialized processes or specialized equipment. So pH affects food in many different ways, from the quality and the safety, right? You want something, you can increase the acidity on the food, the pH, to get a product that's safer and has a longer shelf life, but it might be too acidic for the consumer. It can also affect color, flavor, consistency. I think that's why you see a lot of products historically are using maybe artificial flavors, right? They're more resistant to pH. A lot of the natural colors, a lot of artificial colors are resistant to pH, and a lot more of the natural flavors don't do as well at lower pHs. Canned foods, pH is like the most important thing. Anything below 4.6 is necessary to create the spread of botulism. And the FDA has tons of great guidelines on certain foods and how to process them based on their pH. And then the second most important thing is water activity. It's a weird metric, and it's not quite moisture. They are definitely related. There's some definitions down here that get a little technical, but it's pretty much the amount of water that is available in a product. And that's important because the more water available in a product, the more water for microbes to consume and thrive and live. The least amount of water, or the less water, is going to create an environment where microbes can't grow. Here's a few really common processing and pasteurization steps. So pasteurization is it's just a heat treatment process that destroys microorganisms in certain foods and beverages. There's a variety of them, and they each have their own really specific guidelines to ensure that they are safe. But here on the left, you have what's known as high temperature short time or ultra high temperature, often known as HTST or UHT. All your milk is generally processed in this way. You have HPP, which is a relatively new technology as compared to the three here. It's called high pressure pasteurization, and that's where you're using pressure to kill microbes. So you don't have to increase the temperature, and it's really good for preserving fresh color and fresh flavor. Like you'll see in a lot of the fresh juices that you'll find in the grocery store. And then retorts. This is another really common one. Anything that you see in a can or one of these metal pouches or bags that you'll see in the center of the grocery store has gone through a retort, and that's high temperature with extended hold times to ensure sterilization. Really what that is, it's like a giant pressure cooker, giant, like we're talking, 3 rooms big, where they will pressure cook something so that all the microbes are gone in that product. And it's safe.
This is good, Connor. I've heard that word retort so many times and was always too embarrassed to ask what it meant. So
yeah.
Thank you. And then I'll also highlight like this stuff you have to do for certain products to make it food safe, like maybe you're organic, so you can't use any kind of preservatives that'll help you in shelf life. So you have to end up like doing some kind of tunnel pasteurization or something, but it can impact the taste of your product. So it's good to know that going in. It may not. And also it can impact the packaging. Like I know some people worry about certain kinds of packaging, how it's going to hold up. Obviously you heat something up, if it's like filled too high, it could pop, stuff like that. So it's good to know when you're looking at a co-man also, like, do they have this capability? Because this will rule out a lot of the ones that you talk to.
Definitely. So now we're going to go into some of the actual recipe development and formulation, and we're going to look at scale up here, considerations for scaling up. And I just like to show this because everything is interrelated here, right? So we're talking about the manufacturing facility, the co-man you choose, what kind of capability they have might dictate what kind of ingredients can go into that product, and then that might dictate the flavor that you want and how that product's going to get packaged, and then how long the shelf life is, which is going to affect your distribution channels. So it's a complex, interrelated process where any change in one of these cogs is going to really affect everything else. So benchtop versus scale up. We're going to get into scaling up recipes now. What is a benchtop prototype, right? It's really just like what you understand what a chef might make as a product. It's the cookie from the bakery. What is a scaled up product? It's something that you've increased the batch size tremendously, like to say at least 10x, oftentimes 100, 1,000, 10,000 times what a benchtop prototype scale might be. And it's designed to be manufactured as quickly as possible for an agreed upon price. And it's ready for distribution in whatever sales channel that you're going for. That would be the cookie on the shelf. So you are ready, you have a great concept and prototype, and now it's time to scale up. You need to standardize your recipe, and really that's just about converting all of your volumetric measurements into weights, so cups to grams, and getting all of your recipe really standardized here, so that when you go to manufacture at scale, you're ready. Have all your suppliers listed out, and easily scale your recipe in any batch size needed.
And this is important, right? Because like a cup is actually a different amount in one part of the world versus another, or different altitudes, but the weight is the true way to do it.
Definitely. And that's a great little insight here. Oftentimes people are like, how do I know how much, like, which cup do I use? Or like I Google a cup of flour weighs this much. I tell Nick, never do that. So if you have a recipe already and you're using, it's your cup, it's Jim's cup, it's the cup that you use that, measure your ingredient 3 times. So take 1 cup of flour, measure it 3 times in that cup, and then take the average, and that's your specific 1 cup to your specific recipe. And I find that's the best way to scale everything from volumetric to weight.
I also want to add a shout out here. Try and find a co-man who also does everything by weight. We've had quite a few folks who call us or chat on our solutions hotline where they said, well, my co-man was using a scoop, and they have a scoop in a bag, and each recipe gets 1 scoop. Yeah. And 1 scoop of xanthan is drastically different by bulk density from one manufacturer to another. So the powder is not always going to be the same volume, but it will always be the same weight. So do not let your co-mans use scoops. That's something that some emerging brands run into as well.
No scoops, no sprinkles, weight.
No.
And Amanda, how do people get that solutions hotline, by the way? I know we're going to give the info out for your Catalyst program later, but.
Yeah, if you go on Ingredion.com, you'll see a little button that says chat with a solutions guru now. So there'll also be the phone number on there, but that's super, super simple. Ingredion.com, and the first thing you'll see is chat with the solutions guru now.
Cool. And we'll talk about Catalyst later, which is their program to work more with emerging brands. And everyone keeps asking in the chat. So we will email the slides out to you at the end because you registered. And then also, if you want the recording, just hit our YouTube, youtube.com/@startupcpg and hit subscribe. It'll notify you when this recording goes live. Back to you.
Thank you. All right, so next we're going to get into the process. You definitely need to standardize the process. You need to be as specific as you possibly can. Write down all the steps. Don't skip anything. They're all important. I always like to say, write down your process and then hand it to somebody else and have them make your recipe. And if it doesn't come out the same way, go back to your process and figure out what you wrote wrong and try to fix that. And that's important because as you go through the scale up processes, say you're scaling up into a kitchen, industrial kitchen, and then to a co-man, and then to a larger co-man, having a standardized process is going to make that process smooth. And then it's also a good idea to kind of create this flow chart here at the bottom of your core steps. And this is nice for when you go to a co-manufacturer. It really breaks down your recipe into the big steps in a manufacturing setting. So like we're just blending our ingredients, and then we're cooking, and then we're packing and cooling. It breaks down all 6 of these steps that are probably 250 words into an easy 4-step process to identify what equipment needs you have. So standardization tips. So also I like to think as you're developing your recipe, take as much data as you can. When you're like, I love this recipe, this is the recipe that I want the co-man to make, understand everything that you can about it. If you're baking something, understand the dough temperature and the addition of every single ingredient. When you add your eggs and finish mixing, what's the dough temperature? Understand what your oven temperature is with a real thermometer in the oven, not the readout on your oven. Take logs at every single timing. I mix for 3 minutes at this speed. Take pictures along the way too, because as you're going from a smaller mixer to a bigger mixer, you're going to have to change the time, and it's hard to know how to change that time. But if you have pictures of what your product looks like at each stage, that that's the way it should look, you can reference those when you go scale up. If pH is important, take that. If you can measure the viscosity, do that. Feel, I think this is important too. People often don't like to use the soft words like this, but you own this product. You made the product 200 times. You know better than anybody. If you don't think it feels right, trust your instincts. I think that's really important. Measure weight, sugar level. All this is really important for when you go to work in any type of new environment. Having the more data you can, the better. Here's just a quick checklist, to know if you're ready to scale up, you're ready to go into a co-manufacturer. You need to understand where your ingredients are coming from, what the process is, what the shelf life is, how you're going to pack it, what the costs are, and how you're going to distribute that product. So now we've got a recipe. That's pretty awesome. Let's talk about how we're going to commercialize. So I like to use this one, supply chain, right? This is pretty important. I like to use ice cream as an example here because it paints a picture of why some foods have some certain ingredients in them. You are buying ice cream, you're making ice cream, right? It goes from the manufacturing center to the loading dock to get picked up on a truck, to get dropped off at a distributor, to get put back in a warehouse, to then get loaded up on another truck, to get dropped off on another loading deck, to get put into a retailer's a large freezer, and then to get put into the little freezer that the consumer sees, and then the consumer picks out their ice cream. They spend 30 seconds trying to figure out what flavor they want, and they grab it and leave the door open, and then all the ice cream is subjected to different temperatures, right? So along that whole process, your product is affected by temperature, by physical abuse of moving boxes around. So it's important to think about that and make sure your product is designed to stand up to that process. So more pitfalls here, right? So co-manufacturing versus self-manufacturing. We kind of talked a lot about what a co-man is, but when you begin to scale up, you're likely going to need to find a co-man who can help produce your product at scale. Not all co-mans are created equal. You definitely want to do your research. I think it's important to reach out to as many as you possibly can and interview as many as you can, and pick the one I think that will work with you and is willing to make some changes or to help you out a little bit along the way too. It's hard to find a good one, but when you do it, they really can make the difference on creating a good product. So some key points, if you're thinking about going to a co-man, or if you're thinking about, scaling up yourself in a large kitchen, a commercial kitchen can be a good middle ground to sort out some of your kinks on your process, or at least to vet your product and make sure you're ready to go to a co-manufacturer. I think it's a good spot for a few things. A few categories. I think some categories it doesn't really work for, like beverages, for example. But just some good decision points to reference. So finding a co-manufacturer, this is a great list of questions to ask your co-manufacturer, because every single one of these could be like a go, no go, or really break your deal for going with that co-manufacturer. So like, what are the minimum order quantities? This is probably the first one I would start out with. Are you able to put the bill for 5,000 units versus 30,000 units? Who's going to source which ingredients? This is also something great to talk to co-man about. They oftentimes will be buying bulk ingredients, so you can get access to some of their pricing, or it can just be easier to get the ingredients that they have onto their site. What are the processing capabilities? How does the packaging work? Like, are they able to package the product the way you want it? How much storage do they have, and how does that storage, who's responsible for taking control of the product at what point in time in the manufacturing process? Are they going to store it for a week and then let it clear micro at the lab result and then kick it out to you to go to a distribution center? Do they have allergens? That's a really important. What R&D resources do they have? What other brands have they worked with? Have they done something similar? I think that's really the core question of what other brands have they worked with. It's, have they made a product that's similar enough to yours that gives you the confidence that they can do that or make your product the way you want? And then what kind of financing terms or what kind of partnering do they have during your startup phase there?
Connor, for people, oh yeah, this is
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to talk about.
Yeah.
Just if you go to the next slide, like I know you had said you can reach out to Ingredion if you have questions. Like, how do people do that? Is that using the solutions consultant that's on ingredion.com?
I think that'll be through the Catalyst program, Amanda. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay,
we've created a co-man network through Catalyst so we can help, but here's just some examples of different ways, and PLMA is a great one.
Okay,
Yes.
and then for the Catalyst network, you'll talk more about that at the end. Perfect.
Totally. So just a quick list of, finding comments is not easy. By nature, it's a hard landscape to get into. They're creating products for brands, and the brands don't necessarily want the information on exactly who or where or how the product was made out in the public. So it can be really hard to navigate. Referrals are definitely the best way. If you know someone that has made a product similar. But like Amanda said, the Private Label Manufacturers Association, or PLMA, was a show held in November every year outside Chicago in Rosemont, and tons of co-manufacturers are there and looking for new business. Equipment suppliers oftentimes can help you too, and then scale up or university facilities or your network are great ways as well to find co-manufacturing. So major challenge for new food and beverage companies is initially sourcing ingredients from online stores in the grocery store. I know it's the easiest way, and it's a quick path, and it's okay for some things, but as early as possible, you really want to try to test ingredients from an ingredient supplier, from somebody who can supply you ingredients at the scale that you need to. Most of them will send you a free sample. They want people to buy from them, and you can vet how they'll perform in your application. It can be hard to find the right supplier, but once you find one, it can be a nice little web to find others too. That we're often very much interconnected, and can help you source other ingredients. I've helped plenty of entrepreneurs here at the Hatchery source random ingredients, and Ingredion has nothing to do with, like, I don't know, fresh blueberries or something. So try to source commercially available ingredients as soon as possible because they do differ slightly from grocery store ingredients and ingredients available online. So here's a kind of a little exercise talking about cost parameters where you've got a blueberry muffin with fresh blueberries, but you need to understand, do you want to use fresh blueberries because they're expensive? So here it's key to understand your brand and to consider frozen blueberries, which are more reliable and more consistent and cheaper, as well as using dried blueberries plus a blueberry flavor, which is going to be a lot cheaper and might have the same flavor. And, what is your brand here? Is your brand local Maine wild blueberry muffin, or is your brand high protein muffin with blueberries? Maybe you're going to use those local frozen Maine blueberries in the first example, but you're going to use dried blueberries plus a blueberry flavor where you're really focusing on the nutrition of the muffin, and the blueberry is really just a flavor profile. So supply chain considerations for ingredients, you want to think about a lot of things when you're trying to bring in ingredients into manufacturing. What is the functionality? Make sure the ingredient's going to work for what you need it to do. What's the security of the supply and the availability? I've had this happen a few times at the hatchery. It can be really sad. Like if you're sourcing one specific ingredient and only one person is making it, make sure. In this example, somebody was sourcing a vegan cheese, and the only one they could use came from one specific supplier, and that supplier all of a sudden couldn't get anything for 6 months to them, and it really created a giant headache for the entrepreneur. So understand what those ingredients are, how they work. Try to get a backup supplier too, if possible, especially if it's a really key ingredient. And regulatory stuff, like does the ingredient support the product positioning and claims? So if you're trying to be organic or non-GMO or high protein, make sure your ingredients fit that. And do they have all the proper regulatory support? Are they legal in your country? Are there any certain disclaimers you have to put in your package for using them? Obviously, pricing and cost, and then certifications like non-GMO, organic, and gluten-free.
This is real deal stuff, guys. If you're when you get to the point where you're like, you've paid for a manufacturing run to go down, and then all of a sudden you're like, organic, whatever provider is like, maybe like in 2 months, you're like, you will screw my whole product because I used 0.01% of your product in mine, and now I just can't make it. Like they don't really always care that much. And so really like that point about trying to make sure you have backup suppliers because it will happen. It's the only thing I can guarantee is stuff will go wrong with that.
Definitely. All right, so just here's like a quick little list on ingredients and how they can help you be efficient, right? So think about your product, and these are a lot of ways to make your process more efficient and to maybe save time and to save money, right? Buying a pre-blend in a cookie, you can buy a premix for baking. It's going to save time on mixing, and it might improve your consistency, especially when you're looking at scaling up. It can be oftentimes harder to mix incredibly large scale product or volumes of product. So buying a pre-blend can be really helpful. Ingredient elimination, be critical of your ingredient deck. Smaller ingredient statements are definitely the consumer preference. Are you using oil and butter in an ingredient? Can you combine those into one? Understand each ingredient. Look at your ingredient deck and look at it. Like I really look at it. Like I need each of the ingredients and call out what each ingredient is doing to your recipe, and see if you can shorten that, because one, it's going to help you on sourcing, and two, it's going to be less opportunities for that prior problem to happen where maybe you can't source an ingredient. You can buy pre-processed ingredients. I think if you've not looked into commercially available ingredients, there are so many different types of pre-processed ingredients you can buy, whether it's, fresh frozen herbs or pre-cut vegetables or, starches that will hydrate instantly as opposed to having to be cooked. There's a whole bevy of different ingredients out there that are already processed for you to help you save time. You got to think about ingredient shelf life too, right? Like, are you buying shelf stable, frozen, or refrigerated? That's going to dictate how much you can buy, when you can buy it, and how it's going to need to be stored. The quality of them, make sure it aligns with your brand. Are you making an artisanal product or not? Those are important. And then make sure the ingredient fits your process. So can your ingredient survive the retort, right? If you're going to get this flavor from a flavor house, is the flavor still going to be there after your product is retorted? And then equipment. So you want to figure out what your ideal process is. And I think this is important. If you have a recipe that's ready to scale, figure out what your process is now, but what is your end goal? Because you need to know that. And that's going to affect how you're going to change your process now so that you're ready to go to the co-manufacturer. Like, what steps can I take now in my process when I'm making it at the bench to mimic that as best as possible? If you're gonna start making your product in a industrial kitchen, do you want to think, is this how I'm gonna do it forever? Or am I gonna go to a co-man eventually? And that might affect the equipment decisions then on what you purchase. But really here, it's make sure your formula is as easily transferable to the co-manufacturer as possible. We'll talk about impact of manufacturing facilities. So talk a little bit about shear because it's really important to talk about manufacturing. And shear is really just like any sort of mixing, from mixing on a stovetop to flash cooling or a colloid mill or a pump. High shear can impact the final product viscosity, making it runny and unstable. I've talked to so many manufacturers of products and to solve problems for them where it's like, yeah, everything, we're making a tomato soup, it's in this kettle, it tastes great out of the kettle, and then it tastes horrible, in the package 5 days later. Like, what happened? And it turns out they had to pump the product 100 yards across their facility to the packaging line, and all that shear just was pretty much like running it through a blender for 100 yards and really changed the final viscosity of the product. So there's a lot of different processes in manufacturing that you need to be aware of and understand those to make sure your product's going to have the quality that you're looking for. So processing method, this is kind of just for reference on simplifying things to make your process as much as possible. I'll leave this here just for you guys. So nutrition labeling claims is an important one. So if you're going to call out anything on your label, make sure you understand exactly what the guidelines are. I would recommend talking to somebody with regulatory experience, whether it's a food scientist or a lawyer. But the FDA has millions of words on what is required for each label claim for food and dietary supplements.
So that's something I just wanted to highlight,
Yeah.
30 seconds. This is such a common pitfall that can annihilate an emerging brand, right?
Yeah.
Because it has a legal and financial implication. So I just want to reiterate the importance. Understand what claims you legally are allowed to make on your food products before printing out thousands of packages with the claim on there. We see this quite often, and a lot of it is just your own Google research on the FDA website. But if not, there are folks who specialize in this as consultants. So just wanted to shout out here because the wrong claim can cost you more than a pretty penny here.
Totally. And you can see claims here like good source of protein. You might not think that was a legally defined claim, but there is a legal definition to what that means on the front of a package. All right, back to you, Amanda.
Yeah. So what does all of this mean, right? Now that you're thoroughly overwhelmed, it means that we can help you. So we have a few different resources for emerging brands. We talked about the hotline and the chat line on our website, but a more involved process is our Catalyst program. So Catalyst is a fee-for-service product development model brought to you by Ingredion that helps you launch your food and beverage products by essentially renting out our food scientists. So we have a variety of food scientists. We talked about having over 5 500 in-house scientists globally. We have our own sensory team. We have our own market research team and consumer insights and food safety experts and legal experts on claims. And part of the Catalyst program is that you pay us a fee, and then we help you by providing you access to all of these internal resources. We also have an external ecosystem where we've created co-manufacturers list where they're aware of the Catalyst program and willing to help suppliers for products that we don't carry, like colors and flavors, things like that. So I have included a QR code to the Catalyst program. So if you scan that, it'll send you to our Catalyst website where you can fill out a form to learn more. And then I also have my email address. So I am the manager of the program and happy to answer any questions you may have. So feel free to email or again, scan the QR code, fill out the form, and learn more about the program where we can help.
Amanda, what does it cost? Just for brands that are like, oh, but you guys are like such a big deal. Is it like crazy expensive? I could never even dream upon a dream of working with you, or is it affordable?
Yeah, so I think it's affordable compared to other things on the market, right? So typically the most affordable option is going to be partnering with universities, right? So we found those are typically under $10,000 per day per run. With some support, they'll typically rent out their pilot plant space, but they may not provide as much full R&D support on formulations, legal, things like that. On the other end, you've got large consulting agencies that are well known and Googleable, right? And they typically charge anywhere from like $50,000 to $100,000, $200,000 plus, right? Catalyst program is squarely in the middle. So we're going to provide you more support than a university and not charge as much as a large consulting agency, anywhere between typically $5,000 to $50,000, depending on the work required. So if there's a few things where you just need some benchtop samples, you'll obviously be on the lower end. If you need us to do the full thing from ideation all the way to finding you a co-man and partnering, it's typically $50,000 plus, but we're trying to kind of hedge in the middle here to work with both emerging brands and large CPG companies and find that sweet spot in between. Okay. And then just to end here before we get on to questions, I'll be at Expo West. I'm hoping a lot of you will also be at Expo West and we'd love to chat. So Catherine Ria, her email is here below. You also have my email address. Please let us know if you're going to be at Expo West and would like to chat. Happy to answer any food science questions you may have, help you with sourcing, co-mans, etc. So if you put your name in the chat or email Catherine, we can set up some time to meet. We will not have a booth. We will be walking the show, but we will be available to meet with you lovely folks on the webinar.
All right, that's amazing. So, so you put your email there previously. If people need it again, maybe you could drop it in the chat also. I also saw there's somebody in the audience who I think actually worked with Catalyst, Rob. Rob, if you wanna give us a testimonial or whatever, you can raise your hand and I can promote you to panelist. You can talk about it. Otherwise, guys, if you have any other questions, you could drop them into the Q&A box now and we can see if we're getting them. I see we already answered the one about them being at Expo West. Yes, they will be. That's great. A lot of people keep talking about finding consultants on FDA, like regulatory stuff. You guys can always ask in the Startup CPG Slack. There are a lot of people who will get recommended in there. That's just, I think, a really good way to find any of these things. A lot of you have asked for specific ingredient connections. So if you're not in the Startup CPG Slack, join 25,000 of your best friends who are there to help you out at startupcpg.com. And then you can just ask your question there and you will get the answer. It always works out. Cool. Okay. That is, I think, okay. I'm just seeing if there are any other questions that came out in here. Okay. Rob has joined us. Rob, do you have some? It's always a little risky just promoting one of our 200 audience members, but let's wild card it up. Go ahead, Rob.
Wild card, man. I actually started using Ingredion in the Catalyst program in 2020 for this crazy little project that I was working on that started as a passion piece. and I have used them a couple of times now. Amanda didn't know that I was going to be on this call at all, and I am so startup CPG happy and excited. I try to engage on anything that you guys present, but Ingredion is just subject matter experts. And I would also tell you, it doesn't matter if I'm looking for raw ingredients or even investors, just the name associated of Ingredion is just top notch because they're a multi-billion-dollar company, but they're the most amazing people to work with. Like, they are fantastic. And I'm really lucky to kind of have them as a partner in crime on this endeavor that we have. So reach out to them. They are amazing. They're 10 out of 10. Like, they're great.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, great. And I'll just a couple other resources for you guys. Check out our podcast. I'm not just saying that because I'm the host of the podcast. We have some incredible ones there on how to make and scale formulations. We have ones with lawyers who will talk about what you're going to get sued for. This is real stuff. I've been sued as a brand for just some bullshit. Like, it's good for you to know what you're likely to get sued for so you can try to protect against it. And you can find that if you just go through our archives. Go to our YouTube. You can see all of our past webinars, youtube.com/@startupcpg. Hit subscribe, see all the stuff in there, and you can hit the podcast as well. There was a Foster Garvey one that we did. Somebody just referenced that in the chat. That was a lot of detail. You can see the webinar. We did like an hour and a half, a really deep dive webinar recently with them just on a lot of food safety stuff. And I know there have been a lot of really specific questions that we haven't gotten to. We're just getting to the end here. I tried to answer a lot of the generalizable ones. One, Connor, for you is, what software tools are there when you're doing product development for like feasibility and development, commercialization? Like, I know a lot of this will just happen in a spreadsheet. That's like what I see a lot. But there's, if you're like getting bigger, you want to manage this, you got a team. Have you seen anything that people like?
Yeah, man, that's tough. Working for a giant corporation, we have our own in-house one that's not as good as some of the ones you could buy, probably. Kidding aside, though, I think oftentimes Excel is your best friend. Other ones that I use a lot, Recipal. They're really great for making nutrition facts panels. And the database behind them is the same ones that the biggest food companies in the world use. So I can shut them out.
Cool. All right. A lot of good comments coming in the chat here as well. Thank you, everybody, for adding in your experience there. And then I just saw a lot more chatter about like co-man owning a formulation and a process versus you. Are you going to sign everything? It's really important. If anyone has additional things that they want to comment, somebody else had mentioned in the chat, like, it's good if you go to the co-man that can help you, but bring your own food scientist, and then that's going to be your process. Like, you'll understand it. Yeah. One thing I find really valuable is go to the co-man. Like, if you can find one that's like kind of near you, great. Go there, see what they actually do, be friends with them, like watch your product get made, try it while it's getting made, try it before they actually finish it, like be part of that. And not only will you understand their process a lot better so that you can problem solve with them, but just stuff will go wrong in general, and having a better relationship with them built in person will be incredibly important. It'll help you get line time when there is no line time, get them to send a truck out when they can't. And also, like, you might not be an operations expert, but you're going to need to be, because if you don't have someone doing it, because all it takes is them using one expired ingredient that they didn't check to ruin the entire batch of product. And even if they end up paying you back for it, your brand can be sunk based off you just being out of inventory. And I think one of the things that I really learned is, like, do not be afraid to absolutely dump process on them, because that is how they live. And if you can give them a ridiculously long, specifications or like process sheet, all the things you need them to actually check, they will respect it. They have those capabilities. They'll tell you what they can do, what they can't do. But the more of that, the better, whatever reduces the chance. And a few people asked about liability in some of those situations. There's always a huge risk. You know, it's so hard to prove things with a co-man. Like, no, actually, that was the packaging. That you can't prove that that was us. Like, yeah, how are you going to prove that? You're going to pay like $100K to prove that it was them versus the packaging, and the packaging company's like, no, you can't prove that was us either. A lot of that stuff will lie in gray area, and then it will be the brand. So, you know, get the specifications are the thing that will protect you the most. As many as possible in there about this is the stuff that Connor covered. All of that can be in specs. If they clearly produce something that was not to spec, then they should pay you, and they have insurance for that. But again, very hard to prove what happened in a lot of instances, and really good for you to know their process and their facility so that you will have an idea what could have gone wrong. And yes, any other final comments from you guys, Connor, Amanda?
If it's too good to be true, it probably is. So that's something that I think really falls through with co-mans. The other thing to consider is they sometimes will change the raw materials that they're using. If they can get sugar for cheaper, if they can get flour for cheaper, if they can get some of the other ingredients. So it's really important to understand what you're willing to let them swap out and what you're not, because the not part is the most important piece, which can be extremely functional and change up your product. So that's what I would add to the co-man piece. And again, reach out, email Catherine Rhea, email Amanda Hoffman. I put my email address in the chat. We would absolutely love to set up some appointments at Expo West and get some more Catalyst leads.
All right. And I'm putting just one more time for everyone who's stayed over. Thank you for staying late, class. Amanda.Hoffman@Ingredion.com can be a great resource for you guys, and be friends with her too, because she can help you a lot. I'm just telling, these are, and like supply chain is all about relationships. If people, you have no idea what they can do for you and like who they know. I've seen like I went to Supply Side West for the first time this year, which I would say probably doesn't even have as many co-mans as a show probably like PLMA. But what would the brands that went there because they needed a co-man would just ask somebody there, and they're like, oh yeah, no, I know a guy who knows a guy who does that, and they'll walk you over to that guy, and he's like, yeah, I know the guy, and then all of a sudden you have your new co-man. That supply chain network, it's gold, especially when things go wrong and you're panicking trying to find an ingredient. So you want to know these guys, you want to know all of their friends, everyone like them, and just always make them love your product, and they will help you. All right. Amanda, Connor, thank you guys so much. This, like, even for me, I've been in this industry a long time. There's a lot of new info for me here that I always just pretended to know, and now I do know it. So thank you guys. I hope we'll get to do a lot more content with you. Thank you, everybody, for all the questions. Sorry, we, again, couldn't get to everything, but we had a couple hundred people on here. We do our best. We will see all of you guys on the Startup CPG Slack. Feel free to post, if you're a brand, any questions in there that we did not get to today, and hope all of you will get to sync up with the Ingredion team. You can find them on LinkedIn as well, I'm sure. And thanks, everybody.